G'day, listeners. Today we're going to be chatting with a cybersecurity expert. We're going to be chatting about how cybersecurity impacts national policy, keeping us safe online, keeping us from being robbed. I guess that's the most important thing. Anyway, let's get into it. G'day, listeners. Welcome to My First Party, the podcast where we meet people at the grassroots of politics. My name's Owen Miller. I'm a candidate for the Fusion Party. With us, as usual, the world-famous raconteur from the Hanging Gardens of Brunswick, Mr. Peter Kargiotis.
Sorry.
Sorry, listeners. This is our second time going through this. Anyway, yeah, maybe we're not the best people to be talking about IT tips and tricks.
Well, what I have learned from at least because you're a computer, not programmer, but engineer. Yes, is that the term?
The software engineer.
Software engineer.
Yeah.
What I've learned from my interactions with IT and the IT world is that if there is something wrong, you just switch it on or off.
That's about right, isn't it?
It's a very, very common fix, and you'll be surprised and distressed to know how often that actually works. It's quite ridiculous.
So yeah, we've turned on the podcast again for a second time. Anyway, before we get too deep into it, I should mention Alice is a cybersecurity expert, but we're hiding her identity. If you would also like to come on the show and hide your own identity, yeah, this is a great forum to do it.
I'm empathizing with that emotion right now.
Okay. Anyway, so yeah, we were talking before about the horror stories about the Australian government misallocating funds, liking to have a lot of technical jargon to sort of impress people that they know something, but then the facts speak for themselves. We were saying about the NDIS, the National Disability Scheme, for instance, how what is it now, like $55 billion per year?
Well, yeah, and I was chatting to you earlier about it that they had the Senate estimates, and John Data, who's their IT expert now, who I've had dealings with at the ATO, he was there talking about in the last 2 years, all they've done is a tranche of work to identify how much, I guess we'll call it wastage there is, but at the end of the day, all that they presented was how much work they've done in a tranche of work, no identification to prevent and do things more effectively. It was just jargon about what we're implementing. And the fact is, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy about why we're employed as technical experts, not about the outcomes. And that's what he did at the ATO and got himself promoted out. And that's what he's doing there as well. So again, back to, your point about in Australia and what we do, and the point that was made there, it is corruption. They get these consultants in, they embed themselves in there, and they just roll out these off-the-shelf products. And, as far as the IT expertise, I think that's most common term that they throw around. I don't think the outcomes deliver, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, on that point, Alice, do you have any insight? I was chatting with, there was a whistleblower I was speaking to recently. He was raising the point that when they're hiring people to work in the federal courts, anything to do with legal matters, that what is it, they're not paying their lawyers enough, that if you recently graduate from a university in Sydney, for instance, you could join one of the Sydney law firms and get paid 2 or 3 times as much as you could working for the government. And so it's a struggle for them to hire anyone decent. I see as well, for software engineers, it seems to be the same thing. If I was going to work for the police, for instance, I would be paid about half as much as what I would be paid, by some other company. I guess, do you see the same in terms of cybersecurity experts?
Well, yes, absolutely. The reason that I've never worked employed by the government directly, but rather for third-party companies that are doing, contract work for the government and various departments, was because the pay is triple. I've worked pretty broadly across IT for my entire career, and when I first started out, I started out working directly for the Department of Education at the time, and the pay was pretty abysmal, to be honest. I switched over to the private sector, got a massive pay increase and a lot more opportunity, and, I've essentially been still working for the government, but through, a third-party company through various contracts. So we end up working with many more departments, gaining much more valuable experience for me personally, and getting paid a lot more at the same time. So it's kind of a no-brainer, and it's why like government, IT teams have been shrinking my entire career to the point where they barely exist anymore, to be
So even
honest.
when I was, sorry, also even when I was working for a federal government agency, there was discussion about, instead of employing contractors, which obviously was never going to happen, and that's why I call it corruption, but differentiating the pay based on obviously the capabilities that you wanted to employ permanently in-house. But it was deliberately done where you were, I guess, not employing internally anymore, and then bringing in those consultants because obviously they had the expertise for the reasons you just qualified there. But you were paying excessive amounts for it. And then they'd vented themselves in through some sort of Stockholm symbiotic relationship. And some of them actually then became permanently at very high levels of the organization as well.
Yeah. Actually, I wonder, Alice, do you have any insight? So I was reading on the website for the Australian Signals Directorate, for instance. I understand they help operate some sort of cyber response thing when Australian companies get hacked. But then, I don't know, part of me is torn, like if the company gets hacked, why is it the Australian government's problem? And then like who's actually being assigned? Do you have any insight into how that system operates?
Yeah. So my understanding, like talking to colleagues about this a while ago when this was like initially being implemented, was it was more of a like a damage mitigation kind of thing. The government isn't really taking responsibility out, taking like financial burden to deal with this, but the idea is to try and like lessen the impact and make the Australian people feel like something's actually being done about it. At the time that this was implemented, there wasn't really anything holding commercial entities culpable for security snafus. So one of the talking points for this thing back when it was kind of getting heated was, restaurants and bars collect email addresses and stuff for their little digital menus and things like that. Property agents do the same thing for, like property viewings and listings and stuff like that. They end up having these massive stacks of like emails and phone numbers and all of this personally identifiable information about people, but they have no security requirements. Like a government department has to, at the very least, depending on the kind of data that it holds in terms of, whether it's top secret or, classified or just regular data, they have to reach certain standards. Like they've got to be ISO 27001 standard, or they've got to hit like a certain level of PCI DSS. There's a whole bunch of compliance that they need to adhere to. But that kind of stuff is not really applied, or at the time it wasn't applied to commercial entities like it has been now. Like there is a requirement that if you have like personally identifiable information on an Australian citizen, you do have to prove that you're handling it correctly as a commercial entity. But like 5-10 years ago, you didn't have to do anything. And all of these places would just collect this stuff and sell it because, 100 emails gets you $5. And then, they'd sell a bunch of phone numbers, and that'd eventually, go to some, crazy scam company that's trying to sell noodles or some random thing like that. But that was more the point. Like once your stuff was given to an innocuous third party, it'd get sold on to eventually a malicious actor. And the government was trying to mitigate that damage as it was trying to work through the legislation and figure out like what they could do, how they can kind of make people feel comfortable about it, and then actually start addressing the problem. Then at the end of the day, they hit like a kind of sloppy middle ground of the whole lot that kind of cost the taxpayers quite a bit and has like very little impact because it's not very thoroughly enforced, and it only applies to businesses that make a certain amount of money. So they've got to make like $1 million. So that may hit a restaurant, and it definitely hits like, a property portfolio, but it won't hit smaller cafes. It won't hit like smaller things. Like it's really kind of not very well applied and doesn't really kind of do what it's supposed to do at the end of the day, which happens a lot, unfortunately, that like legislation and technical information very rarely align in a way that works.
Well, for the most part, you really want your cafes and your small restaurants to, make sure they're handling their food and beverage component first and foremost. That's their main, I guess, priority. So, the burden that they need to face as far as, privacy of emails and phone numbers, that's not their main priority.
Yeah.
So anything that they have to deal with that should be just almost agnostic in how they manage it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why a lot of technology for that has stopped taking in personal identifiable information because they don't want to deal with it. So of
Yeah,
course
that's right.
it makes sense.
To be fair, Peter, I see your point about, that's not their area of expertise. They want to deal with food. But, for tax, for instance, we don't say, like, let's let them fudge the figures a bit on their tax because, their expertise is cooking.
No, but you don't go there to do your tax returns either.
um,
You just do an exchange of money.
no,
right?
but this is part of doing business.
No, okay. Let me expand your point to me, right? So the principle of your point. So when you go to purchase a souvlaki from, across the road there, and you go to tap, before they do that exchange, do they ask for your credit rating? No, it's just a simple exchange.
Sure, I don't
So,
think this is
no, your analogy to me was about the
Yeah.
tax. So again, you just do a simple exchange. That's all they're interested in. So it's exchange of product and service. And as far as the cybersecurity, sure, if you want to give an email address so they can send you out a menu, that's all they're interested in.
On that point, actually, I went to some Peter was recommending I get some new sunnies recently. I went to OPS.
Why?
Oh, the old ones make me look a bit like an incel, but anyway, viewers, you know me well enough to know that I'm not. Anyway, so anyway, I went to OPSM. I picked the glass. Everything was sorted. Well, I had a few minutes to spare. Anyway, picked the glasses. They told me to take a seat while I purchased them. Like, what? How can it be so involved? They wanted to enter me into their database, address, date of birth, everything. And yeah, I told them I don't want to be addressed as Owen Miller, all caps. I'm a person, I'm not a database entry. And they made a big deal about it. Ended it there. Like, what the hell?
Did you buy them?
No, I don't want to. Why do I have to be in a database just to buy something? The souvlaki person, they don't ask me to join their fucking database just to buy souvlaki.
So now you're a convert, is my point.
Touche.
Let's go.
Right, anyway, I think we need more people need to stand up for themselves. I think that's more useful. Yeah. Anyway, but back to the point. But Alice, sorry. So with the Signals Directorate cyber thing, the hotline, when people get hacked, that's just mopping up afterwards. They don't I guess. Would they give you any useful advice for avoiding these problems again in the future?
I mean, yeah, kind of. So, because I've worked with these guys in the past, they do similar stuff to what we tend to do when we're doing consulting for, post-breach analysis. So, say we did the one for Service New South Wales when they were breached back in 2018, 2019. But the idea was, this is what happened, and this is how you are supposed to have done things to prevent this kind of thing from happening. And this is the kind of stuff you should do to prevent it from happening again in the future. So they can kind of help, but there's not really anything that says that they have to do this. And like part of the reason why, I eventually became so disillusioned with working in cybersecurity is I've done hundreds of these things, loads of them. A lot of them have been public knowledge, and a lot more have been kind of, swept under the rug. But there's been, I've been through hundreds of breaches. There's been hundreds, thousands, who knows, millions probably at this point. There's been a lot of them. But the one takeaway that I got from going through all of these post-incident responses is a lot of the incidences that I responded to and then did the analysis of, I'd be doing the same response and the same analysis with the same department and the same team 6 months to a year later. I found that even, places that are dealing with classified and top secret levels of information are simply not taking cybersecurity seriously, and then a breach will happen. They'll do a lot of public, fluff and saying, oh, we're going to get better, we're going to do this thing. But then, behind the scenes, nothing actually really changes. A lot of stuff just kind of stays the same. They'll install a few patches here and there, they'll add a firewall over here, but, none of that actually addresses the root issue. Security is not simply, patching a server. It's more of a like a design philosophy, like from the ground up. Like if you're not designing
So
for security, it doesn't matter how up to date your stuff is. It's
yeah,
simply not going
yeah.
to be secure.
So apart from like preventing, some, Nairobi prince trying to get to my bank account, and what protection there can be and so forth. What about the things that are done like by design now? Whether it's Paladin and some the big
Palantir, you're
or
thinking. Yeah.
Palantir, sorry, yeah, and the big kind of tech bros out there that are buying up, various, what.
Oh, Peter's given me some shit about this topic before.
Yeah, so, and who are obviously harvesting a lot of information because they own these. The governments are working with them. Even the Australian government's working with some.
Oh yeah, the good
some,
governments are clients of these
yeah,
companies.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's
I've
happening.
worked directly with Palantir, with
Yeah,
the Australian government
okay.
as well. That
Yeah,
they're
so
in
that's
there,
so that's
unfortunately.
happening by design now. So we can talk about again the peripheral things of whether my bank account got hacked and so forth. But this is now happening by design.
I guess, yeah, like the government wants to stop, let's say, North Korea and people in Nigeria from hacking your bank account, but they still want to be able to, hack you, use the Palantir tools to, compromise your phone, read all your emails, that sort of thing. Yeah. I wonder actually on that point, yeah, Alice, do you have any insight? People are always switching which encrypted messaging app to use because, inevitably backdoors get installed by the US government. Do you happen to have any insight into like, are there any that aren't currently compromised?
So the core tenet of cybersecurity is you have to assume that you've already been compromised at all times. So when it comes to these services, unfortunately, the only way to truly like know that you are like properly secured is to do it yourself. Like go get some bare metal, put it into a co-location somewhere that you trust that's, fairly local, and then, build your own, or use open source software, but build your own server, build your own end-to-end communication signal client, or you build your own like peer-to-peer voice chat service that allows you to do things
No
like
idea what you're
essentially,
talking about.
well, yeah, yeah, it's complicated, and this is why not many people do it, because like even someone like me who has all of these skills just readily available, it's still a monumental effort to kind of
Oh yeah.
get off of Gmail and move to your own private mail server, or to get off of Discord or Facebook and move to like something that's more like of a community focused space rather than
So can we
a
actually
corporate
talk about?
monolith.
So can we actually talk about a little bit what I brought up, that what is actually happening now?
With
these-
the corruption, people pretending to do work.
No. With these big corporations and how governments are working with them.
Oh yeah, Palantir and them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what we were saying. Like, how do we avoid, like, let's say the government from spying on us? We were saying, like, we have to presume that we're already compromised. And so actually, a friend was sending me, you've heard about, I guess everyone is suspicious that, our phones are listening to us. A friend sent me some information about how TV speakers could also be listening to people, anything with a speaker. And so like washing machines now, they play a song, your clothes are ready. Dun, 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 dun. So make our theme music. I was just thinking, maybe our theme music is also worth code to listen to. But yeah, like any speaker can theoretically act as a terrible microphone as well. And so yeah, that's the theory that the US government, I don't know which government is
literally is like 1984 boxes, isn't it?
This is plausible to you as well.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's not even a theory. Like honestly, you can turn a lot of really mundane things into listening devices. So a couple of years ago, some guy figured out how to exploit a home Wi-Fi router to use its Wi-Fi signal to create an accurate real-time 3D map of the interior of your home, which then can be used to identify and track people and pets throughout the home. It's relatively innocuous, but also quite terrifying. Since the 60s, we've been using single pane glass as remote microphones. Like you can point a laser at a pane of glass and you can just listen to what's happening on the other side. Easy. You can
Oh, sorry,
use.
on that point, we should mention you have to be able to get to the glass though to put the
But
speaker up.
you need
Yeah.
you need line of sight, yeah. You need to be able to see it, but you can measure the vibrations in the blast, and that kind of gives you a rough analysis of what's happening on the inside, which gives you the ability to essentially copy a conversation and spit it out the other side. Like it's wild. Like think of a thing, you can spy with it. The fact that our phones are all little listening devices that have always on microphones on them, and like the Apple ones have like little LiDAR scanners that are constantly kind of pinging out as well. Like it's all terrifying, to be honest. And it's more or less confirmed at this point. They're not being directly used by the government that we know of at this time, but that has happened on 4 separate occasions now. Like the Pegasus malware was probably the most like widely known one.
Oh, that was Jeff Bezos. He got compromised by Pegasus, didn't he?
Yeah, he kicked up
You
a
revealed
stink
it,
about
yeah,
it,
yeah.
and that led to people figuring out that, hey, this isn't like some random malware made by like some random like nerd in a basement. It was actually made by the government, the NSA, with the express purpose of compromising personal devices and turning them into listening devices. And like, there's no evidence that such a thing exists right now, but I guarantee you that something like that will be discovered in 5 to 10 years' time, and we'll go, oh yeah, no, they've been listening to us the whole time. Again, like you've always got to assume that you've already been compromised. So like, if you want to not have your conversation listened into, you got to like take the microphone out of the room.
Yeah. Actually,
We did that at Brunswick Green the other week, remember? Say something to me. You said put the phones away.
well, we're not meant to talk about it now. I'll share it. Okay. I got all this effort to avoid being on the watch list. But, yeah, no, actually, what was I going to say? Oh yes, so sorry. When we were talking before about like making our own encrypted messaging app. Yeah, I guess Peter was saying like he doesn't understand what we're saying. And sorry, viewers, maybe your eyes were glazing over as well. But I should mention
Ignorance shame me there.
sorry. But Alice, you remember the app Anom? That they were using for the cops were doing that. Do you remember? And so people might remember it as Operation Ironside. So this was about 5 years ago. So there was a previous app, Phantom Secure. You had to buy a modified BlackBerry, and then you could send encrypted messages to other criminals. But then
Just criminals?
yeah. Well, that's the only people they were selling it to.
Okay.
But then, so those people got caught out, and then
Because they had a criminal record.
oh, well, I guess they did. But anyway, anyway, when one of the technical people who was involved in Phantom Secure offered to the FBI, I think it was, please go easy on me, and I will help you create the successor to Phantom Secure, the next.
What's that?
Exactly that sort of thing, but it was called Anom,
Okay.
as in anonymous. And yeah, so right from day one, it already had a backdoor in it, and so these criminals were like messaging each other, thinking it was fine, but yeah, like from day one, the cops could see all of the messages. Alice, you remember this? Yeah.
Yeah. And this actually does happen quite often. If a large government organization infiltrates a criminal organization, whether it's software or not, they will usually stand it up for a while and use that to cast a really, really broad net to capture as many of the consumers of that criminal network as possible. They did the same thing for Silk Road when they tried to shut that down. It was a purveyor of all goods illegal on the darknet, and they had it under their control for quite a few years, and they just used that to catch people that were trying to traffic children or buy illegal weaponry and ship it into certain countries. And there was quite a successful campaign. But like, yeah, if you actually want to do anything illegal on the internet, like, and I don't condone this, but like, you got to read the source code yourself to check it for backdoors, because like pretty much everything can be compromised these days. And compromise goes from both directions. It can be a government compromise to catch criminals, or it can be a criminal compromise to steal civilians' data.
To catch governments, maybe, yeah. Well, yeah, because you
Yeah,
remember,
yeah, absolutely.
With the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, revealing a whole bunch of corruption, including
Except the Epstein files.
Yeah, well, it's a shame
Mm.
nothing happens here. And so, yeah, I guess we were saying before, like, how can we have these conversations that aren't going to be recorded? I guess, yeah, you need to go to the island where you can have prep conversations.
Wi-Fi free,
Mm.
no wives allowed.
That's a good point. But oh yeah, sorry. Why I brought up the Anom app. Yeah, listeners, if you want to read the book, Dark Wire, it's a story about how the Anom app got started and everything. Yeah, a very exciting book. I finished in 2 days. Yeah, so that was good. But actually, Alice, you raised an interesting point before about the Silk Road. Same as the Anom app. It seems to be like every time some sort of cyber criminal gets caught out, they always flip, don't they?
Well, this is the problem. Like a lot of these cyber criminals, like they're not doing crime for fun. They're doing crime for money. And if they feel like they're going to get caught, that money is useless, and that's it. Their life's kind of over. So of course they're going to flip the script and try and sell it to the government or try and barter for like a position of work or something like that. Like most of these people, like then they're not doing crime for fun. Like they're doing it because they've got no other choice or because they just want the money. They're greedy essentially. And, like greedy people will break the law all the time, but like when it looks like they're going to get caught, they're going to look for whatever out they can find, whether that be selling the product or, doing whatever. And like in cybersecurity, especially, like it's a historical problem where someone, does hacking, they break a bunch of shit, they cause a bunch of fluff, and then the government's like, hell yeah, we're going to hire this person and make them do that for us. I mean, that's how I got into it. I got my first job in the Department of Education because in high school I wanted access to the internet, so I hacked their network and took control and got into a bunch of stuff that I wasn't supposed to, and then they eventually found me out and they're like, all right, cool. How about you do something productive and stop people like you from doing that in the future? And that was it. That's how I started.
Okay.
It's great.
That's how I got my
Yeah,
job too.
it's common.
Not computer stuff, but I was like, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? And they're like, oh, do you want to fix it? And I'm like, all right. So ended up having a career that way too.
Okay. I thought you were going to say you hacked the tax code. You found some loopholes. But yeah, no, it does sound intriguing. Well, actually thinking of that, about hiring hackers and how do we get the government? Oh, sorry, how does the government get these people to work for them? Can you tell us a bit more about when we're thinking about like nation states hacking each other? So I guess I've heard before that North Korea has like some capable people. There's an incident as well of Syria hacking its opposition. Who would you say are the current threats we have to worry about?
US, Israel.
Yeah. For Australians, the only real like threat is the US, and that's kind of the Australian government's fault. They've been migrating extremely sensitive data into the cloud, and all the big cloud that they're using is owned by the US government. Well, it's not owned by the US government, but it's owned by US companies, and they are beholden to the US government. If the US government says, hey, we need access to the data that you stored in your cloud, there's not really anything they're going to do to stop that from happening. So, like, if we're using Amazon or Google or, Microsoft, if the NSA wants access to, top secret and classified data, they can absolutely just lift up that data and give it directly to them without us really even knowing that's happening. To be honest, it's quite a big threat. Something that I was very opposed to when it was first rolling out across the Australian government because of just the fact that you can't secure your data on someone else's hardware. It's impossible to make it genuinely secure because you can't attest that they haven't lifted that data somehow. Like you can copy data from storage without really like the virtual machine underneath knowing about it. So that there's a billion different ways to exfiltrate that data without us knowing that it's being exfiltrated. And then there's a billion different ways to take that raw data and turn it into something functional, whether it be, through decryption or through, if it's not encrypted at rest, just opening it up like a regular file. Like it doesn't take much, but it's a significant security threat for the Australian government to use stuff that is, beholden to the American government. Allies we may be, they're notorious for spying on their allies and,
Well,
leveraging that
we're-
information.
we're not allies. We're a subservient,
Yeah,
peg to the empire.
allies in quotes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, yeah, we've covered previously. I think it was when Drew, the Fusion president, was here. We were chatting about submarines. And yeah, we were saying about like, maybe Australia's not spending all this money because we really want the submarines. Maybe we're spending all this money because like we'd rather keep the US as like an ally on paper than an enemy. And so,
Yeah.
like, I guess we sort of have to,
We're in a gang, and we've said, okay, we're aligning to this bully because they're in a fight, their own, however they want to, do their fight, whether it's real, otherwise coerced, and we've aligned to this bully. That's it.
I wonder actually, on the point of, if we're moving things to the cloud, I guess, yeah, there's Amazon, there's Google. Do you happen to know offhand, like, is there any cloud provider I guess like if it was moved to China, that would have the same problem. The government's going to be able to spy on it. I guess, is there any cloud provider that you know of who's more secure for Australians?
I mean, it's a fundamental flaw with the concept of cloud, unfortunately. If you want like data sovereignty guaranteed for Australians, you need a cloud provider that is based in Australia, like plain and simple. But then you're beholden to the Australian laws instead. So the Australian government used to actually have a series of data centers where they made their own little cloud where they stored all of their stuff. It was a government-specific data center.
Yeah.
And that, made sense, but it's also very expensive to run that. Like running a whole data center is expensive. Like the more stuff you cram into a data center, the cheaper it gets. But by design, the less secure it becomes as well, because you start blending like government and, stuff that's like public grade together. So, if there is like a compromise that manages to get escalation and it comes from something that's just like, like a personal blog or something like that off in one corner, and that spreads onto the host and that moves over and gets onto the government servers that have like legitimate stuff, that I see it as a major security vulnerability, a major risk.
I don't know, but I think the whole discussion's like redundant because we're still talking about like Australia's got its own sovereignty, right? Well, no. I know you've got this ping every time we talk about it because Owen actually believes in the nation state, and he even made a comment recently that he'll defend for Australia's sovereignty and so forth. Like the LNP leader now, right? What's the idiot's name? The
which one? Who they've
the
got?
water
Angus Taylor.
Angus Taylor. He should be in jail for this corruption with the water.
Absolutely, yeah.
He got our oil reserves over
moved to the US.
To the US, right?
I don't understand how they count as reserves anymore.
That's just one example, right? So the whole notion that we've got this sovereign state, like we're discussing, like we've got the moats. We've pull the drawbridge up, the moat's there. How do we protect this now? It's done. Well, it's done.
I guess one way of looking at it is sure the sovereignty of Australia, but the other thing is like if I want to run a business in Australia and not have all my secrets leaked to the US government or the Australian government, how am I supposed to do that? Yeah, it sounds tough.
Cash.
Well, I guess like we can do the self-hosting, but then of course that implies like I guess you'd probably be using Linux, but I guess it's probably worth mentioning to people that like if you use Windows as your operating system, that's American, like that's going to be compromised as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's why you're seeing, like, especially over in the EU right now, the push towards creating an open source EU-based operating system to get them away from stuff like Microsoft, especially. If you've been following the development of Windows 11, it has an absolutely absurd amount of telemetry baked into it, and it's not suitable for secure use in any way. There's so much telemetry and there's so much monitoring that it's just like it's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd.
Was it?
I have no idea what telemetry.
Alice, was it you? I was asking. I was reading just like a few weeks ago that the French government, I think, was now moving to Ubuntu instead of Windows, like to keep its data secure and everything. And I was thinking,
So it's not quite Ubuntu.
oh,
So
was moving too much.
It's a Linux blend, but they're working on creating their own distribution. So it's based on Ubuntu, but it's gonna have, with whatever it is that they think the EU is gonna need and what the French government use. They've already been using this in I think it's the police bureau have been using it for a while by memory. So it's based on that, which is a derivative of Ubuntu, and that there's I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. I've had a look at it. I've been following along, but it's definitely like an Ubuntu based flavor, and they're working on their own Office fork as well, with the sole purpose of they want to make this precisely what we need for our various government departments, with the intent of then pushing it to the rest of the EU over time if it succeeds and does what they need it to do.
Actually, perhaps it's a good time to bring up Fusion's view on all this. Tell me if you agree or disagree, by the way.
Probably disagree. The rest of your policies. I'm not part of Fusion, by the way.
Okay. Alice, you're not a member of any political party, are you?
No.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so this is going to be genuine feedback. Yeah. So one of the things, so when we talk, for instance, about an EU operating system, I guess we're recognizing that the software that runs our society is part of the public commons. It should be something funded by society, government. And so, Fusion, for instance, supports what if the government can support open source software? And so when we were saying before about people get hacked and the government will help them sort of mop up afterwards, measure the damage, what if, if we're thinking more preventative action, different, what if the Australian government funded open source, tools to help you implement proper security, instead of all these spin-offs of WordPress or whatever, implementing crap security for your cafe to get hacked? What if there was more open source alternatives that are more user-friendly to more easily implement security? And so, for instance, some of the worst hacks in history, if we remember Heartbleed, that was 2010 or so. So remember, it was all the SSL certificates were leaking, so that you could steal, for instance, the certificate for Google, and then you could make your own certificate saying I am google.com. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So you, as a Fusion policy, you're now going to go and speak to the constituents out there and tell them what?
Well, okay. What if the Australian government was going to help you live your fullest online life by paying,
giving me tips how to be safe?
No, giving you actual software, funding the development of actual software.
Okay, sure.
So
okay,
Alice,
instead of what? Instead of
at the moment,
Microsoft or whatever.
Instead of leaving the internet and your online life as the Wild West, and you have to fend for yourself, and pay Microsoft just because it's easiest or whatever.
Sure, but now you have to convince me, as in, so is the government going to have access to all my information?
No. It's
I'm giving you a devil's advocate. So tell me why I should trust the government now.
Well, the government's just funding it; they're not actually making it.
No. You need to convince me. As in, why would I join that and not what exists now?
The biggest differentiator is with the open source software, you can compile it yourself. So, for instance,
smells like a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. But remember during COVID, they released, for instance, some sort of tracking app, for you to say, I was at this shopping center, and then they offered to make it open source. But I think there was a difference. You couldn't actually go from that source code to something that could run on your phone. They'd left out a step or something. And so, you can look at this source code and see that could.
I'm not convinced yet. What are you selling me as a policy?
So there are important bits of software that run our online life.
Right.
And at the moment, it's just a free for all, mainly private companies offering those services.
All right. What's the risk? What's the risk that you're now going to mitigate by letting a government run it?
So the alignment of incentives is not perfect at the moment. So Microsoft, let's say Google, for instance, Google is absolutely critical to our online lives. And, they used to have that saying, don't be evil. They've got that. If your email was going to be hacked, for instance.
So I think you need to start selling it as the current state is this, and this is why it's fucked. What we need to, I guess, mitigate away from this is blah, which
Okay.
you're saying is perhaps this open source, which is governed, that has good governance because government's doing it, because we trust the government.
Well, then, hang on, okay.
Well, maybe not the government. They're my words, right? So you need to put in some logical, because I'm not, look, I don't understand half the language you're using here, right? Because the discourse is not familiar to me.
Okay.
So
Let's use an example. Alice, correct me if I'm wrong. You remember Heartbleed?
Could you? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
He was a rough time.
Yeah. So viewers who don't remember, yeah. So the point is, so OpenSSL, it was a popular library for managing SSL certificates. So, when you go to google.com, it's encrypted. Nobody except you, like your browser and Google, can see what's inside that message. So only they can read your emails. With the OpenSSL bug that was called Heartbleed, I could go to like the google.com server and I could get their private keys so that I could issue my own certificates. So if, for instance, I was running, the Wi-Fi network at the cafe, I could give legitimate certificates to everyone in the cafe saying that my computer is running the Google servers. And they would send me their password, and then I could read their emails, do anything in their account. This was a nightmare scenario. And it happened because OpenSSL, this library that was critical to the running of the internet, was only being maintained by like 1.5 people. This guy, he wasn't being paid like full market salary or anything. And then that was the problem. There was this bug that nobody had seen before because not many people were being paid to look at it. They were doing it out of just the goodness of their hearts. And, one of the obvious takeaways afterwards was if the internet depends on this, we need to fund it.
So aren't you then making an argument, I'm hearing, again, I'm going to put it out to you, an argument against open source?
That's what some people say, sure.
I just said it.
Yeah. Okay. And the thing I would clarify is, yes, open source means that you can easily spot the bug, but closed source would mean that maybe there is a bug there, but only, the malicious person gets to find out about it. Here, having the source code open means that thousands of eyes can inspect it.
Yeah, but there are thousands of idiots out there. My issue is, where's the governance, right? And how do you then mitigate the risks and issues?
Alice, what are your views on this, by the way? Like, would you agree with my conclusions about the Heartbleed bug?
Well, yeah, and like as well, one of the outcomes from that whole mess and various other similar messes from similar projects was the creation of like open source collectives where people would actually get together and pool resources and then go do marketing and like donation drives to kind of ensure that critical projects were getting like proper development time, proper like security auditing and a bunch of other stuff like that. Yeah, it is like an ongoing issue though. Like there are a lot of projects which kind of they are the core of literally everything. Even closed sourced operating systems like Windows are still heavily dependent on open source projects. So like we do need to have like some kind of funding going into these projects, not only to make sure the developers are getting some kind of incentive to keep working on this stuff, but to generate enough interest that people actually look through these projects and ensure that they are safe, that they are secure, that they're being properly upheld. Like, there's been numerous like massive dependency issues where people have been dependent on a technology that's just like people stopped working on it like 5-10 years prior, and it was just riddled with like extremely like inefficient code, but also like extremely insecure code, and like it was causing endless issues, but no one really wanted to take responsibility and fix it. And like a lot of people just, it's like, well, whatever, it works, it's fine, don't worry about it. But like since we've started bringing in like the open collectives and the people that are like running like the big open source projects are kind of snapping up these little projects that are critical to their work and ensuring that they're getting the support they need. But by all means, we need as much money coming in as possible. This whole like France taking on Linux as its primary operating system both for government and potentially for like its people is great, because even if they don't like directly monetarily contribute, if they're keeping the project open source, if they fix like an upstream issue inside the Linux kernel everyone think, oh, have a look at that and go, oh yeah, cool, right, of course, let's bring that in. Probably one of the biggest proponents of this lately have actually been Valve. They're a video game studio / publisher. Yep. They have been working on this thing called SteamOS, which they ship with their little Steam handheld console thing called the what was it called?
This is like
It's a hand. Yeah, it's a dedicated little gaming handheld console thing. It's great, but it runs a modified version of Linux, and it's got a bunch of really cool stuff that they've added to it. But like one of the things that they've been really pushing for, because it's for gaming, it needs to be able to access like the latest and greatest standards. So they've been pushing like hardware manufacturers to actually properly make sure that this stuff works. They've managed to get a bunch of like standards that were essentially not available to Linux ported across so that hardware started working correctly. But that's led to like massive security improvements and performance improvements across various different Linux projects. It's brought in a ton of interest and a ton of money. And of course, everything that Valve's doing on these things ends up being open sourced, and it goes in both directions. They bring in the new stuff, they do their thing, they put it out, and it goes back and forth. So like having more of that like is going to be great. Like if there's like an AU OS Linux distribution that the government works on or assigns a bunch of developers to, or even if they just like throw like $1 million a year at the GNOME project or the KDE project or like the Linux Foundation, that's going to have a massive impact on almost everything. Like especially considering that all of our online server infrastructure runs off Linux. It doesn't run on Windows, and it doesn't run on anything else. It is 99.9% Linux. So if there's a massive security vulnerability in Linux, it affects everything.
Okay, so what is the risk of these risks? What's the outcome? What's the what are the consequences of these risks?
People die.
Okay, so
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the consequences of these risks are death.
Yeah.
Okay, but everything I'm hearing from you guys is that we just can let people do things, and the resolution and benefits will happen because they'll get spotted, and we'll put money into it, and people will identify it, and they'll fix it.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing anything about there's rigor and governance in it.
Wait, hang on. Okay. Viewers, you're probably thinking the same thing as well. How does this apply to me? Who cares if my email gets compromised?
No. I get it. There's consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like I go back to, when I was at the ATO, right? So when this is going back, say 2010.
Yeah.
There were a lot of departments that had, they had their own little enterprises where they found little, people all over Australia who had, your little brains, right?
Ouch.
No, we're putting together macros and databases to help put stuff together, to help, because there's a lot of stuff done in a very archaic way, right? Very transactional stuff. Now, let's say Owen Miller was working in Townsville office in some transactional space in the ATO, and the director there said, geez, Owen, all these staff are keying in all these things. And you said, well, I could probably eliminate 3 hours of that by developing a macro, then having that put in the database, and, we could, brilliant.
Yeah.
We can do that. You do that. Owen Miller then, moves on, gets promoted. That macro needs updating, doesn't know what's done. We're starting to get the wrong outcomes then, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That was happening, mind you.
Yeah.
And then we had all these different pockets all over. So that's what I'm saying. A lot of this stuff's happening, but where's the rigor and governance of some central team to then say, okay, all these databases, these macros, for example, I'm just using that as an example. Exactly. Yeah. So the capability of who's doing it and how, there has to be some rigor and governance. Sure, we can have everyone contributing to it, but there needs to be some control. And that's where before, when I was saying to you, I was kind of nudge you to say, fine, if the government is going to be the regulatory body or someone who does it properly, and I'm not suggesting this government is the right one. They're already beholden to, we've seen who they are. But there needs to be something, because at the moment, these consequences are happening because it just seems like there is a cowboy industry out there.
Alice, would you agree that on the point of like maintainability, that is an issue, I guess, with plenty of open source projects. One that comes to mind is there was a popular library, color.js, and then so it was made by one guy. To be fair, I don't think the library really did much, but anyway, it was a popular library, and then the guy was asking for donations about like this was taking a lot of time, and eventually he got sick of asking for donations, and he just deliberately broke it. And I think there was some sort of like long text about like fuck the USA, and I forget what he was saying. But anyway, and then so everyone who was using his popular JavaScript library, this was visible on the front end of various websites. They decided, oh well, let's just steal his project. Let's go back to an earlier version, fork that, like copy across his code, and it will no longer be color.js. It'll be like our stolen version of color.js.
Rainbow.js.
Yeah. And so, I guess, for me, the moral of the story is like, if you're relying on these people, you need to pay them to keep them contributing. Like for this guy writing the macro, if he had kept being paid something as retainer for like updating the script or whatever, maybe not him, maybe someone.
Well, that's my point. It's not him. There should be a capability. It's the capability, because then people can come in and out. And whether it's updated or even terminated because it no longer serves its purpose, there is a capability that makes that determination based on what outcome you're seeking. But what I'm hearing now, it's just like, by default, it somehow will get to the point we want because the community will make the decision whether it's right or wrong.
I'm saying that the community should keep funding it if the community wants it.
No, when I say community, I'm talking about the IT community who are contributing to the progress of whatever is getting built.
It sounds as though we write all this useful software for the rest of you lot and you don't appreciate it.
No, I don't, because it's fucked at the moment what's going on, right? We just said, what's happening. The technocrats have got too much control.
Alice, do you have any solutions here, by the way?
I mean, there's no real good solutions. Like the various collectives and foundations were kind of put together to mitigate that kind of issue by having order requirements and standards compliance tests and all of this stuff, and like part of the funding that they were collecting was going into doing that. But that doesn't work for like smaller projects. It doesn't work for isolated individual projects that don't have massive teams of developers working on them. And, unfortunately, there's always going to be stuff that slips through the cracks that just doesn't have the attention that it needs. And, it's a tricky one. We do need, like, a proper body of governance behind this. Like, the reason that the Linux kernel is as stable and secure as it is now is because the Linux Foundation is constantly pouring through code, digging stuff out, looking for bugs, going through compliance over and over again. But like they're a massive, massive team at this point. Like, it's not something that it's just not something that smaller teams can do, or individual developers definitely can't do it. Like, can you imagine like asking like one guy who's doing this for fun to go through and do like 200 pages of compliance reporting every time he releases a new update, or to put together a software bill of materials to determine whether there are any active supply chain vulnerabilities based on, which packages are pushed out on which day of the week. It's a lot of work for one person to do, but when you get the bigger organizations, it gets a lot easier to do. But it is something that, like, especially governments that are benefiting from open source, and especially commercial entities that are benefiting from the same projects, they should be doing that internally and making that information public. While Yeah.
So I was going to say the one thing. No, I was going to say the one thing I keep saying every episode virtually is that the one thing government is responsible for is good governance. And I appreciate that, your external companies, whether it's your KPMG, the big fours, etc., they pay consultants a lot more. And maybe, sometimes government, yes, they want to get digitally savvy and be at the the front end of the trajectory of where everyone else is, but to compromise what they're mostly responsible for, and that's governance, it's gone way beyond. They've lost their mandate of what they should be responsible for.
They don't seem like benevolent caretakers of society anymore.
No, they're just corrupt. Like, when you got in our country here, you got literally Pauline Israel Hansen now getting on a plane that's donated to her by Gina, and there's no care at all. Absolutely no care. Like,
she's saving the taxpayers' money.
yeah. But I'm just saying, like, our government now, there is no, like, and Albanese just released, sorry, I digress now, no, for the budget, there's not going to be anything about the gas, right?
Oh, well, that's not too surprising.
Well, no, it's not too surprising, but I'm just saying, as far as the government and the governance, it's just like, there is nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Hey, Alice, there's a game we like to play with our guests. There's a political quote. You have to guess like who said it, how much, and then we'll chat about how much we agree with it as well. Listeners, sorry, this one's quite hard this week, but I really liked, what it's talking about. So it's by an author who I think is still alive. Let's just assume he is still alive. Anyway,
it's a he.
It's a he, like a mathematician sort of vibe. Anyway, quote unquote, the difference between technology and slavery is that slaves are fully aware that they are not free.
Is that it?
That's
okay.
It, yeah.
Say it again.
Sorry, the difference between technology and slavery is that slaves are fully aware that they are not free. Alice, would you agree with this, by the way? People being enslaved by technology?
Yeah, I would. Technology, it's kind of designed to kind of cook you at this point. Pretty much everything's designed using something called the Skinner box methodology, which is essentially creating like a little gambling machine where you kind of convince people to chase like tiny little hits of dopamine over and over again, and like all social media is like that. A lot of gaming is like that. A lot of entertainment's like that. The diminishing attention spans that we're seeing across things is kind of designed to push that kind of content onto people and get them consuming for as long as possible.
Yeah.
It's
real Pavlovian dog kind of mindset. You're waiting for
it really is, yeah.
Whether it's dating apps, whether it's your Instagram feeds, everyone's just waiting for that next ping, 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 ping.
Well, actually, thinking of those algorithms as well, like for dating apps or for job applications, I'm thinking, in terms of slavery, what comes to mind for me more is that like, there are these algorithms making like biased, probably bad decisions where like, like some AI might read my resume and think like, no, we don't want Owen, whatever. And they give no feedback at all. You just get told the generic no. And then these people have no insight into like, how come I can't get a date? How come I can't get a job? Nobody's telling them. And yeah, like I think, these people, I don't know, maybe slavery isn't exactly the most relevant word, but, that this person is, suffering.
No, but the point is with slavery, as you said, they're cognizant of their condition where basically most people aren't, right? And it goes back into that, Plato's discussion about the men in the cave looking at their shadows. Their reality is like, no, I actually enjoy it. It's more time that I spend just scrolling. I'm in control of that. But
well, I guess here I'm thinking, with
you can go for a walk outside, but no, I'll actually look at some pictures that my friend sent me from their trip to Tahiti.
Or if the friend is even real. I was.
It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
I was listening to a podcast the other day about this guy falling in love with his chatbot, dating his chatbot, and this was a conversation about what do you call it? The therapist was chatting with him and his chatbot. But yeah, it's horrifying. These people, their life getting sucked away. I guess when I was saying maybe slavery is not the best word, you're definitely becoming a second-class citizen if the algorithms discriminate against you. But I guess the difference with slavery is like your efforts are no longer being put towards any sort of useful work. But anyway, sorry, back to the question about, does anyone want to guess who said it?
Oh, you said a mathematician, so.
Oh, primarily an author, or anyway, in this context, I think he was an author. Anyway, it was Nassim Nicholas Taleb. So he wrote the book, for instance, The Black Swan. He's a professor, a mathematician, American. Yeah, anyway. It was going to be hard this week.
Good chat.
I've heard from some viewers like playing along with the guessing the quote game. Viewers, please leave a comment, by the way, if you have any feedback about the show and that sort of thing. But I guess, Alice, before we head off, do you have any tips about, what the government should do to improve our online lives? Any tips for people, how to improve their online lives?
Well, I mean, I've already advised the government extensively what they should be doing with various departments. Definitely getting out of like foreign government-owned cloud would be a great start. Probably following France's lead and starting to push into developing a local open source operating system, or at the very least trying out the ones that already exist in an effort to reduce our dependency on Microsoft. Another great idea. For like regular people, like there's not a lot you can do, but like the more like stuff you use from big corporations like Microsoft and Google and Amazon or Apple, like the less secure you'll be. So like the more of that kind of stuff you're using, the more monitoring and telemetry you're inviting into your life. So just kind of be mindful that if you're making a post on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, it is effectively public information that anyone in the world can gain access to at any point in time. Even if it's like a direct message between friends, it is actually very, very trivial for that to be exfiltrated and, gobbled up by a government or a malicious actor even. It happens far often than anyone would like to admit. So just, yeah, be careful what you do on the internet. It's not a safe place. Just, yeah, that's like the main takeaway, I think.
I think actually on that note, I'll finish. Viewers, I would repeat the advice from esafety.gov.au. The main way to keep yourself safe online, to stop yourself from being hacked or anything, the number one way is to be kind. So let's take that advice from the government. Okay, thanks, Alex, and thanks, viewers.
Thank you.